Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, two men armed with rifles and dressed in balaclavas walked into a Vancouver Island bank, taking nearly 24 people hostage.
The first broadcast I hear is two males inside the bank, long guns, and multiple hostages inside.
It appeared as if they were waiting, they were looking outside, they were looking in the window, and it was almost like they were waiting with no rush to leave.
All of a sudden, your heart rate's just jacked, and you start preparing your mindset for what you're about to get into.
And the more time goes on, the more the little hairs in the back of your neck stand up. Something is seriously wrong here.
Where all hell broke loose.
On the first crack of my pistol, I lost my hearing.
I managed to shoot at him 3 times. In around there, I get shot. I'm on my back in the van. I can't for the life of me open my eyes.
Next thing I know, I'm knocked down to the floor of the van because Damien and Steve are shot in front of me.
The emergency response team was effectively finished. 6 of the 7 of them were shot.
What had started out as a hostage taking had morphed into a violent encounter with police.
Here now is Jules Knox with Double Deception.
Just north of the sparkling waters of Victoria, British Columbia's capital, is the surrounding suburb of Saanich. It's home to families and retirees, and some might say that the pace of life runs a little bit slower. One of the main roads cutting through town, connecting north with south, is Shelburne Street. And on June 28th, 2022,
oh my God, holy dude. Oh my God.
That main artery was pierced by gunfire. Blood spilled onto the street. But we want to start 16 minutes earlier. Just as a woman was sitting down for her appointment with the bank manager.
I got to the bank at 11 o'clock and sat down, and 2 minutes later, there was an incredible explosion and shocked me, and he stood up, and I looked and I saw that the tellers had gotten down, and I said, you know, kind of what to do, and he went so calmly, "We're being robbed."
These two young men, they entered the bank and started by taking one shot and shooting it into the ceiling, the kind of typical thing you see in the movies.
The gunmen captured control of the bank. They took all of the 22 people inside hostage. Customer Shelley Fryer was still sitting with the bank manager.
I said, "Should I get down?" And he said, "Just a sec." And I was gonna go by my chair. I was now going to crouch by my chair, and I look up, and in the doorway is a guy standing there with an assault rifle, balaclava, vest, some guards on his legs, just standing there, quietly, standing there, calm, didn't say really anything at all. The manager held the key out, and then he said, "Vault," and the manager tried to give him the key to go. He's like, you know, "Go." So off they walked to the vault, very calm.
They then scurried everybody, they gathered everybody and put them in a back room, attempted to get as much cash as they could, which actually wasn't all that much. They actually appeared to be somewhat disappointed by the amount of cash they were able to recover.
He kind of forgot about me because he took the manager away. And I kind of reached up and I grabbed my cell phone, and then I called 911. There was 22 people being held hostage in the bank by 3 men in gear and assault rifles. And I whispered and whispered, but I knew that it was so quiet in the bank.
People that were actually inside the bank described them as being very calm, collected, unstressed, and just pacing around. They were waiting.
Dead silence in the bank, dead silence. Quiet. And I thought, I'm not hearing any sirens, I'm not hearing alarms. I looked, because it's shaded at the glass, and I looked and I couldn't see him walking, but I heard another voice, so I knew that there was at least two of them.
We continued to get more information that the suspects were still inside of the bank. One of them was wandering inside of the lobby, kind of looking outside of the bank. There was screaming coming from inside of the bank, and people were also putting their hands up.
Typical bank robberies generally involve someone going in and usually presenting a note, requesting money, and they're usually gone, unfortunately, well before the police ever arrive. It appeared as if they were waiting, they were looking outside, they were looking in the window, and it was almost like they were waiting with no rush to leave. Very quickly, we determined this is more of a hostage situation. This is a takeover bank robbery.
They were just walking, they were wearing black clothes, and even the blinds were open, and we can saw them easily with their guns, like they were just walking inside, and we had goosebumps.
We shut down traffic in the area. There was nobody coming or going, and we were keeping our police officers out of sight. We didn't want the people inside to know we were there, and we want to separate the bad guys from the hostages, if possible, on their own accord, before we take any action. Us going into the bank to try to do something is going to elicit probably a violent response.
So you don't even want them to know that you're surrounding the bank at this point? You're like hoping that they're going to come out and then you're going to make your presence known?
Yeah, our goal is 100% that these guys are going to finish doing whatever they're doing and they're going to leave, and then once they leave, we will arrest them outside.
But now they're not leaving.
Now they're not leaving. And the more time goes on, the more the little hairs in the back of your neck stand up. Something is seriously wrong here. If this was a true hostage taking, I would expect that they would be reaching out for something. We're not getting anything from inside.
I paced back, very calmly walking, calmly. You know, frightened to death. There's a poor woman who works there who's pregnant.
Were there any fears that the gunman would shoot the hostages?
That's always a possibility.
16 minutes after the gunman entered the bank, they walked out the front door, just as a white van was pulling into the parking lot.
Oh my God,
Holy
dude. My God. We are witnessing a bank robbery. Holy.
Welcome back. Two gunmen stormed Saanich's Bank of Montreal and demanded cash. But then with 22 hostages held captive inside, they wouldn't leave. Here again is Jules Knox with double deception.
Before any gunfire erupted, as two robbers paced inside this bank, the Greater Victoria Emergency Response Team, similar to the SWAT team in the US, was on another call.
We have a door call.
I turned my radio, and then within about 30 seconds, I told them to abandon the surveillance operation and to roll immediately to the bank.
The first broadcast I hear is two males inside the bank, long guns, and multiple hostages inside.
While we're driving there, we get updates that police can see hostages inside with their hands up, they can hear yelling. So all of a sudden, your heart rate's just jacked, and you start preparing your mindset for what you're about to get into.
We are in one of our covert vehicles. There are 7 ERT operators in there. We roll up about 2 blocks south of the bank. Because our van is completely covert, we do a slow drive-by of the bank.
3 sides of that building to the bank were glass, and it was a sunny day, so a lot of reflection was coming off the glass. You couldn't see a thing inside the bank at all. So tactically, we were at a disadvantage.
And so I ended up doing a little bit of a turnaround in a parking lot of a restaurant that was neighboring the bank. I ended up seeing a group of police officers that were holding at that point.
So we were equipping ourselves, coming up with a plan in front of Fujio when a white van pulled up beside us. ERT had joined us. And I remember the comments they said was, when we roll, you roll.
When the two suspects exit, we're not going to allow them to re-enter the bank. Our number one job is to protect the members of the public. Once these people have separated themselves from the only members of the public that they have access to, we're going to prevent them from getting back at those people.
We were stopped and parked for no more than 60 seconds before we heard a critical update on the radio that the two suspects are exiting the bank by themselves.
John immediately steps on the gas and we're headed southbound on Shelbourne Street, 50 meters down the road, and hard turn into the parking lot.
And that's when me and 5 other officers were in a stack and we ran towards the bank.
Time just slowed down. I could see 2 men walking with their backs to us, holding long guns, and they had this very eerie swagger.
They're about 15 feet away from us. Their heads are down, their rifles are down, and there's almost like this sense of defeat that I can see as they're leaving the bank. They've been in the bank for 16 minutes at that point and taken 22 people hostage, yet have had no reaction from the police. I throw that flashbang grenade so it lands in front of them. And I'll never forget this. He head snaps, pivots 180 degrees, rifle is up, and there is this distinct muzzle flash that comes out the front of his rifle.
There was dozens and dozens of shots being fired. You can hear the different types of weapons. Like there's louder bangs and there's quieter bangs.
I have no idea where my teammates are in the back of the van or what stage of the takedown they are in. I just know that now my life is flashing literally before my eyes. His first round ends up being fired into the front passenger wheel of the vehicle that I'm driving. And then he's just shooting as he's coming up and raising his rifle, is shooting as fast as he can. On the first crack of my pistol, I lost my hearing. It was really loud up front in the van. There was glass going everywhere, and the cab of the vehicle was filling up with gun smoke. I can remember staring at my pistol trying to figure out how can I make this thing work faster.
I managed to shoot at him 3 times. In around there, I get shot. I'm on my back in the van. I can't for the life of me open my eyes.
Next thing I know, I'm knocked down to the floor of the van because Damien and Steve are shot in front of me. The van slider door closes onto Damien's rifle as John hits the brakes and he starts delivering his rounds. My brain screams like, fight! And I pull open the slider door. I'm lying on the floor of the van with 1 foot out of the van, 1 foot in. I draw my pistol out and I start firing rounds. Very early into my engagement, I experience a stoppage on my pistol and my brain screams, no! And I fix it, tap rack, and I'm back into the fight.
I could hear rounds going off and I was trying to do everything physically possible to get back into that gunfight, but I couldn't open my eyes and I just couldn't move. I felt so vulnerable that these guys were going to flank the van, come around the other side and just continue spraying bullets into the van.
We get to a point where the first suspect that has been shooting has started to fall back onto the heels and twist and fall onto the ground.
The other individual eventually gets hit, drops his rifle first. That disabled it. But then he began to crawl towards the other person's firearm, which was still operational.
And he was now like hard crawling towards it, trying to grab onto it. So I have this like really crystal clear sight picture, the front post of my pistol, the rear posts of my pistol, right over the center of mass of his body. And like time slows down where I'm like firing around, I'm watching it strike his body, but it's having no impact on it. My head is screaming like this isn't working, it's hitting, it's not working. And I right away remind myself that there's body armor. Shoulder pads, arm pads, leg pads, shin pads, even padding on their boots. By this point, he had crawled in front of the van where I don't have access to his head. So I start firing rounds down his body to his hips where I find a gap in his armor.
So I was actually driving on the highway, listening to my radio, monitoring the channel, and I actually heard the gunfire erupting in the background of a radio transmission.
It was just like a machine gun going off. It was incredible, and all the scattering, and then the police came in. We fell to the ground, and we went underneath a bush and huddled under the bush. There was 2 rounds of fire.
Your mind is swirling. I don't know what's happening until one of the other sergeants on scene came over the radio. I hadn't even fathomed that a police officer had been shot.
The road sergeant, we heard his voice change, and I can remember very clearly hearing the sergeant mention that there were officers down. And still, when I say that, right now to this day, I feel chills. Time froze for a moment for me.
The 2 individuals together took 12 shots towards police. Those were very effective, given that 6 officers were wounded.
The emergency response team was effectively finished. 6 of the 7 of them were shot.
I witnessed 2 of the officers being shot. It was a pretty intense and gory sight. Like, my family is more than mortified. My daughter is terrified.
I think we're all feeling pretty shaken. We're in a lot of shock. It sounded like fireworks, but it just kept going.
We witnessed all of a sudden a bunch of police officers coming down the sidewalk towards us, and I witnessed, 2 police officers with AR-15 rifles, one with a pump shotgun and one with a dog, and they're all wearing their armor.
There's a tough period of time there where our officers have to step over our injured comrades and go off and save the public.
There's still hostages inside, and the bank still needs to be cleared. There was some information on the radio that there may be a 3rd suspect.
We have an unknown number of people inside the bank that have been held hostage. Is there a chance there's more bad guys inside? Is there a chance any of these people are hurt? The 2 suspects, I don't know, are they alive? Are they injured? Are they feigning an injury and hoping we come in closer? Have they rigged themselves with explosives or anything, booby-trapped themselves?
Gunshots blasted outside as nearly 24 hostages huddled together in a back room near the bank vault. And police prepared a rescue mission, concerned that a 3rd suspect could be waiting inside.
They were all sequestered in a back room. You can only imagine what they were going through as the gunshots were being heard by them, not knowing if these people were coming back in the bank.
The people that need to go in the bank, without hesitation, they charged into that bank, and we don't know what's inside. Are there more people? Did they set booby traps? They didn't know. They located the hostages very quickly. Obviously, these people are very upset. There ended up being a 2nd story to the bank and some locked doors that the officers inside had to deal with.
Outside in the parking lot, officers slowly approach the gunman lying on the pavement.
When you're making that approach, it's quite possible for somebody to be playing possum, for somebody to be sitting on a secondary weapon like a knife, if it's a handgun or if it's an explosive, you just don't know. We thankfully had the assistance of police dog, but the members that end up moving up and handcuffing these guys, there's no doubt in my mind that they were feeling, the stress.
The first individual, it was obvious he was deceased based on the head wound, and they determined the other individual was also deceased. We estimate that police took approximately 100 shots. The effectiveness of the body armor was demonstrated as there were only a few wounds on the first person and only 9 wounds on the second person, in spite of the fact that he would have had 8 to 10 times that number of shots taken at him.
On that day, I was assigned as the lead medic. And what I see there is, quite frankly, carnage. There was blood all over the place.
I managed to open my eyes and I looked down my leg. My pant was just drenched in blood. My boot was drenched in blood. My femur was sticking out through my tack pants. I reached into my cargo pant pocket and pulled out my cell phone, and there was a bullet hole right through my cell phone.
We start looking to see if he's been shot anywhere else. And right away we find that he's got a gunshot wound in his abdomen. It entered one side and exited the other side.
And I remember thinking, I can't believe I've been shot twice. And images of my precious kids came to my mind.
I make eye contact with Damien, and I can see that I'm looking into the eyes of a dying man. The color is draining from his face. His eyes are slowly kind of rolling to the back of his head.
It only takes minutes for somebody to bleed to death. And when I say minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And because that was an active tactical zone, even fire and ambulance were not permitted in initially for their own safety.
So this is a hot zone. The paramedics aren't going to enter.
Yeah, it's a hot zone. Paramedics and firefighters are not going to enter yet, no.
As I look into the van, beside Damien is Steve, and he's doing one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. He's putting his own tourniquet onto his leg, calmly, with no expression onto his face.
I jumped into the van, and I remember at the time I described it as a bloodbath. I began scanning his body for further injuries. I found bullet wounds to his lower arm. Obviously the scene was not safe for ambulance to come in yet, but we knew he needed to get to hospital as soon as possible. Myself and one of my partners picked him up and put him in the back of the police vehicle, and an officer drove him to Royal Jubilee Hospital.
I look at the windscreen and I see that it's peppered with gunshot holes. I know that John was in the front seat of that van, and the first thing that comes to mind is like, okay, John is dead. John is going to be sitting in that front seat dead. I'm going to have to assess him later.
I end up getting out of the van to move to another position of cover, and that's when I'm shot, is when I'm on the move. Once the gunfire stopped, I was really focused on the two suspects who are now lying down in the parking lot there. My mind was really distracted with the fact that I've also been shot, so I keep looking down at my foot. I'm hobbling around trying to get to a better position of cover.
I see John pop out from behind the bushes, and he's limping on one of his feet, and like this rush of like overwhelming relief like hits my body. He's like, oh man, I don't know how he made it out of there unscathed. Later I learned that he had shot out. Those were rounds that I shot out, not in.
The scene commander would have identified when it would have been safe for an ambulance to arrive, and eventually one did.
To give you a little bit of an idea on the timeline, I get a notification from my critical incident commander that this call has taken place at about 11:09, and by 11:33 I'm in the back of an ambulance, having been shot myself.
I don't understand how I wasn't shot. In my position in the van, the seat that I was sitting on, there's a gunshot hole. Damien was shot right in front of me. We were shoulder to shoulder. Colby was right in front of me. The round that would have hit him in his trap would have gone right in front of my face. Immediately after we loaded the last guy up, police officers that were inside the bank began debriefing the hostages in there, and they learned that there was a third shooter and there was an unaccounted for bank employee still upstairs in the bank. And we believed that that shooter was also upstairs with him. So I put my body armor back on, and myself and 3 other ERT members, as well as some Victoria Patrol officers, made a push upstairs to locate that bank employee and to see if we can find that third shooter.
They knew that there was likely or potentially a third suspect waiting in an ambush position in the bank.
We were stacked up in the hallway, and I was number one, like on point. That's the first time that my mind kind of like catches up and like says, if this guy starts shooting through the walls or jumps out here, like I could die. My body armor might not stop these rounds. Like I can die here.
We pushed through because of the lives of the hostages.
As we go upstairs, we are able to find the bank employee. She's hiding inside a closet in the cafeteria. We bring her out and bring her downstairs. She was very clearly distraught. She was pregnant.
And then you look around this area, is anybody else hurt? There's nearby houses, there's the businesses across the street.
Another ERT member was communicating with me, and he mentioned that he was concerned about a vehicle that was parked in the parking lot of the BMO. It became clear to me that it was likely associated to our 2 suspects.
When patrol starts deploying and getting covert containment on the bank, One of them makes an observation of the suspect vehicle in the lot. The trunk was slightly ajar. And then after we get into the shootout with the suspects, that same vehicle, the trunk looks like it's now closed. And the belief is potentially that the third suspect is now hiding inside this vehicle. The police end up using their database, run the license plate of the vehicle, and it comes back unattached to any vehicle. So the suspicion starts to increase significantly.
I recommended that we actually use the armored rescue vehicle to just as a safety platform to try to get that trunk open. It does provide significant ballistic protection, and that did work.
Their vehicle was confirmed to have a large cache of ammunition, additional weapons, and some explosive devices that were determined to be of the homemade variety.
It's a terrifying day in Saanich, and it is not over yet as police continue to search for another possible suspect. Kylie Stanton is live with more on this devastating story. 6 officers shot. Kylie, an unbelievable scene that unfolded in broad daylight.
Yes, that's right, Chris. We have learned and confirmed that 2 of the suspects involved in this armed robbery here in the 3600 block of Shelbourne Street have died. Now, there is a third suspect still at large. Police have evacuated the area. Businesses have shut down. Residents are being told to shelter in place. They're also being asked not to share any police activities or locations on social media as they continue to search for that third suspect. We've actually been pushed back from the police tape over here as there was quite a bit of activity earlier on. They thought they had eyes on them, but at this point we haven't seen much activity in the last half hour or so. Now, the explosive disposal unit did arrive on scene at about 5:30 this evening and has been dealing with that potentially explosive device in the suspect's vehicle ever since.
It was a small arsenal. I think it's fair to say it's one of the probably more complex and extensive explosives calls in Canadian history.
In the community of Saanich, Shelbourne Street was blocked for hours after the bloody shootout. And investigators continued to hunt for a third suspect in the bank robbery.
We're taking all safety precautions necessary. We've asked all those areas around the bank incident to remain in their houses, lock their doors, what we call shelter in place.
A couple of bullets had pierced the storefront of a local laundromat, just steps away from where witnesses gathered watching the gunfire.
At this time, we do not believe that any bank employees, bank customers, or members of the public were physically injured in this incident.
Everybody inside the bank was calm. Nobody did anything that caused anything bad to happen. They kept themselves safe.
Just in the last few minutes, it sounds like there was an update on that search for a possible third suspect. Do you have new information?
Some good news. Saanich PD just tweeted out that the shelter-in-place order has been lifted for this area. There's no further indication of a third suspect.
I can confirm that 2 suspects are deceased and several members of the Greater Victoria Emergency Response Team, known as GVERT, have been transported to hospital.
These officers had life-threatening injuries. There was no answers at this point. I recall getting information of how urgent it was for us to get in contact with one of our officers' families and have them attend the hospital as quickly as possible. That is not news I wanted to hear.
That was overwhelming, for sure, to tell family members, first of all, what had happened and that they needed to just get to the hospital.
Of the 6 that were shot, 3 were critically injured. That's what we call a mass casualty incident.
Was there a fear that some of the police officers might not make it?
Absolutely. I was asked a number of times, the simple question, is he going to make it? I've been at this job long enough that I know what I don't know.
Officers at the shooting were replaced by their colleagues and started to return to the police station.
And I hopped into a car. I was obviously very distraught. I couldn't comprehend what had happened. And I felt my world kind of closing in, and I felt really claustrophobic, and I experienced my first panic attack.
There are tears, there's shock, there's blood. People don't know what to do. They don't know if they can wash their hands.
They're worried about washing their hands because they're worried about evidence?
Exactly. So there is that concern.
Anytime we use force, we're subject to a criminal investigation. So the police officers that fired their weapons that day are subject to a criminal investigation. In this event, they killed somebody.
I'm very emotional. I don't understand what's happened. I see I'm covered in blood. I look in the mirror and my face is blood, and I don't really recognize who I am. But I know that the next stage is that I have to go upstairs to our identification section. You gotta stand there, you gotta get your photos taken. They start taking your firearm, you're removing your belt, you're removing your body armor, you're removing your shirt, your pants, your boots, everything's being seized. They have to swab your hands for gunshot residue, and they're taking photos of my hands. My hands were shaking so much because of the adrenaline that we had to take a break.
You know, they read their rights like anybody else because they're being detained for the investigation. It's a difficult thing to go through, to be sat down in a room and told that you have the right to call a lawyer, you're being investigated for a homicide. There's no easy way to do that, and it ends up being emotionally damaging to those people. But it's the system that we have to go through, and it can be better.
We definitely took a trauma-informed approach. You know, we're really delicate with the idea. Obviously, there's an investigation that needs to be done after this, but also putting first our members and their mental health. And so just really ensuring that they have the support with them.
4 days after the bank shootout in Saanich, police identified the dead gunman.
The two deceased males are 22-year-old twin brothers, Matthew and Isaac Octoloni from Duncan.
Despite previous speculations, there was no evidence found to suggest any third party was involved.
It was like two loners. They were twin brothers, just kept to themselves. Even their family reported they didn't know too much about what they did.
The 22-year-old brothers had a triplet sister and a now deleted Instagram account in Isaac's name showed a fascination for firearms. Isaac had completed a Soldier for a Day program with the military, and Matthew had applied for the Canadian Armed Forces but didn't pass its aptitude test.
Apparently they had been living with their mother. They both worked at the same job in light manufacturing, and police believe they'd actually been planning this attack for 2023, but decided they had to move it up to last June because they were forced to move house, and they were worried that in the process of moving, somebody might discover this arsenal that they'd been building up and call police.
So the brothers decided it was time to carry out the robbery ahead of schedule. On the date in question, surveillance cameras captured their Camry looping around the area, driving back and forth. The trunk contained at least 30 homemade explosives and 3,500 rounds of ammunition.
Were they on police radar ahead of time?
No, nobody knew who these guys were. Is this just an attack on the police? Is this two disgruntled people? Is it a mental health thing? Is it an act of terrorism? We don't know.
Welcome back. As police continue to investigate the Saanich bank robbery, questions swirled about why this happened. We now return to Jules Knox with the conclusion of double deception.
At some point, we all learned that the target was us, that the reason that happened that day was that the police were targeted and people were out to kill us that day.
It wasn't about money. It was about killing cops. That chilling motive revealed today about the violent shootout at a Saanich bank in June of last year.
It was determined the suspect's primary objective was to shoot and kill police officers.
They were trying to incite a violent encounter with the police and harm as many police as possible. And they were using the people inside the bank as their tool to do that. They weren't getting the stimulus they wanted from inside the bank. They weren't getting the police rushing in. And they either came out to try something else or they came out to do the same thing somewhere else.
It does appear as though their behavior was impacted a lot by television, movies, etc. These two young men had come up with a plan that mirrored some incidents in the United States.
In fact, a post by Isaac's Instagram account referenced a bank shootout in North Hollywood.
He's shooting into the car.
In 1997, two heavily armed robbers drew police into a firefight. Both gunmen were killed, and 18 people were injured, including a dozen officers.
It was uncanny how similar that incident was to the North Hollywood shootout, from balaclavas to the makeshift body armor put over their legs, to even them acquiring a white vehicle. I think it was about 4 days before the shooting.
The way they dressed and prepared themselves, it does appear that they were prepared to enter into a form of their own Armageddon.
The suspects had legally purchased their firearms, legally purchased their ammunition, legally purchased all the components for their IEDs. They, quite frankly, had outgunned and out-armored me, who I was standing there with a single plate Kevlar and a 9mm pistol against someone who's armed themselves with essentially everything that could be legally owned.
So the question was put to the investigators here, looking back, was there any point at which these guys should have been flagged and stopped? They didn't have an answer to that question.
Those two brothers had planned this event for over 2 years. When it was game time and they finally had their interaction with the police, that engagement was essentially over in 6 seconds, and they were incapacitated at 21 seconds. So despite thousands of rounds of ammunition, IEDs, training and equipment, we prevented anyone from the public getting hurt or getting killed, and no police officers were killed. And at the end of the day, it's a mission accomplished.
I was shocked to learn that they were so young, that they were Canadians, that they had that much hatred toward police or the government. I didn't feel personally attacked by them. I've never been angry at them, except for when I'm physically unable to do things, like playing with my kids.
I think you kind of always go to, how do we get to this point without anybody knowing? You learn in policing that there's just some things you never get answers to. And one of the biggest things is I've learned is that you'll just never really truly understand why.
It's not lost on me that parents lost 2 boys that day and a sister lost 2 brothers. And I just think that's tremendously sad.
The bank robbery triggered a number of investigations, and not just into the suspects. Police conduct during the shootout was also examined.
So the role of the IIO is to conduct independent civilian-led investigations into any incident where police may have caused serious harm or death. This was the most extreme event I've ever had occasion to investigate.
Subject officers are separated from other officers with the purpose of protecting the integrity of oversight investigation. It's really hard. The human norm is to come together, console each other, and share stories. To be pulled apart and essentially have like escorted visits with your colleagues was really challenging. You know, the story I'm telling you now is not the story I had at the time. I had complete memory blackout. I actually had no idea what happened when I was at the department. I have almost no recollection of the actual firearms engagement at that time. My memories took 3 days to 3 weeks to come back to me. So I was actually I was in a sense of despair because I had no idea what happened. I didn't know what I did even have the opportunity to fill gaps of the story. You know, research shows that it does support and limit PTSD symptomology later on down. When you have the story, you're able to talk to people who've been there, who understand it.
Both the police and the 2 individuals who had been in the bank, they began shooting at each other. It wasn't possible for us to determine who shot first. Our findings were that the actions of the police, simply put, were justified.
This is almost 2 years ago now, and I've never watched a video of what happened that day. I was there, but I did see that picture, and I have that picture saved on my phone, and that's Constable Jarosh standing over top his wounded teammates that he works with every single day, and you could hear him clear as a bell from half a block where I was barking out who needs what and the medical interventions that needed to happen.
At least 3 of the members had immediately life-threatening hemorrhages, and the others had other serious injuries that involved nerves and major muscle function. All of them will have long-term effects. Their enthusiasm to recover frustrated their doctors sometimes. You know, I'd have nurses and doctors shaking their heads going, they really shouldn't be doing chin-ups off the door frame.
I spent total 71 days in the hospital. I was put into a medically induced coma for 7 days. Initially, surgeons were saying it's not looking good, and spent about 10 days in intensive care unit where I went through multiple surgeries. All I wanted. I wanted to hold the kids, to hold their hand and say, hey guys, Dad's here. I'm okay and I'll get through this. I went in so beaten and broken. Leaving the hospital, I wanted to be on my own 2 feet. As a statement to myself, but also to a statement to these 2 guys that planned to kill me. He's like, no, I'm alive and I'm celebrating this win. And I took 6, 7, 8 steps out of the hospital and had this reception of friends, family, co-workers just celebrating with me.
Damien is a warrior, he's a fighter. The average human would not have survived Damien's injuries.
When they finally leave the hospital, it was just almost a little bit of sense of relief and happiness, but then also sadness, because you know the long road that they have ahead.
I got into my parents' vehicle, they were driving, and my kids were in the back, and we started heading home, and I said to them, do you guys want to go to the bank and see where this happened? And they looked at each other like, are you ready for this? I'm like, yeah, let's go. And so we drove to the bank. We pulled in just where our ERT van pulled in, and we got out, and I just walked through them, that whole scenario. And a big part of that for me was just trying to normalize that location.
I experienced like a significant survivor's guilt. I didn't understand how out of 7 people in that van, I was the only guy who didn't get shot. I was depressed, I was anxious, I spent my days on the couch crying. I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. It's had a huge impact on my family.
Looking good.
Yeah, you're looking good.
I feel like I've been in the physical healing for so long. As I kind of get to the end of surgeries and get my body back, that, you know, there's a focus on some of the mental healing that needs to take place. I'm going to work to get back to that level of fitness. My goal is to get back on the team. I want to get back out there. I love that job so much.
Those 22 hostages inside of the bank, I don't know any of them. But what I was willing to do that day was to risk my life and the life of the other police officers to save theirs.
When an incident of this magnitude occurs, I think it really caused people to reflect in our community of exactly what police officers are trained to do and what they will do, which is put their lives on the line. We were overwhelmed with such kind notes, letters, gestures.
Going through something like this, you really see just what you already knew, and you have some amazing, dedicated individuals who gave and ran into the line of fire to save their community that day, and they would do it again.
The Police Complaints Commissioner recently cleared officers of any misconduct during the bank shootout. That investigation is automatically triggered when police kill a person while in the line of duty. For those who were there that day, the psychological scars can run deep, and the triggers can come out of nowhere. Officers say the recovery is ongoing. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.